Hi everyone, Catherine here from Inky Finger Cat, back with my using up a magazine kit. Now I actually filmed this straight after, well, a couple of hours maybe after I made the last video in this series. So yeah, confession, these are not videos that are filmed today. If you are watching it when it has come out, I am a little bit ahead, and I actually made this just before my holiday. So yeah, quite a bit ahead really. So for this one, I decided I would use the fuchsia stamp that I had not yet inked up. So this is the first time using this fuchsia stamp, and I decided to go in dead simple with my messy embossing watercolouring type technique. For those who do not know, I am not a great colourist of any description. I am not very good at painting. I know vaguely where shadows are meant to lie, etc. But thank you to Amy from Prairie Paper and Ink. Yes. I saw her do this many years ago on her YouTube channel, where you stamp it lightly in a light ink, leaving your stamp in the stamp platform, or stamp positioning tool, whatever you're using. You then go over it with your colours that you want to colour in. Don't worry about how messy it is, and then you go and re-stamp it with embossing. And emboss it in like a gold or something like that, and it just tidies it all up for you, and it all still looks lovely. So the important thing for this is sort of leaving a little bit of white space or doing some variation in the colouring. So don't all do it all in a block exactly the same colour. So you'll see here I'm using different parts of the flowers. I'm doing in different colours, but also I am trying to give a little bit of shading. But I'm not being precious, and that's the important part about this technique, is don't be worried about being too precise. Now, I am using quite a fine tip paintbrush at this point. It is like a really tiny paintbrush because it is quite a detailed image. And you'll have also seen that I did stamp it twice. I only actually end up colouring one. The reason I stamp things twice is because if I mess up, there's a second one I can use. So instead, the second one that I can use is actually just left. And yeah, whether at this stage I've not used it, but whether by the time this video comes out I've got around to using it, maybe. Now I mainly use Stampin' Up ink just with that little bit of Concord knife for the bright pink, but mainly used old Stampin' Up inks. I think Old Olive is probably, oh no, Mossy Meadow is also an ink colour. I think that's a current colour, but yeah, I've had this for a while. So I'm drying it thoroughly. If I'd have coloured the second image, I wouldn't have needed to do this at this point, because the reality is that it probably would have dried naturally anyway. There wasn't huge amounts of water, and it wasn't a watercolour cardstock I was using. It was quite a thick cardstock, but it wasn't a watercolour stamp, a watercolour cardstock. I then used my Versamark to ink up the stamp, stamped it again. This is the why you leave it in your embossing, in your stamp platform, in the same position, because you're just going to put the cardstock back in the same position, so you don't need to worry about lining up, etc. And it embossed beautifully with a lovely level of detail, and I'm really happy with how it looks. Now, this magazine kit does come with the die that cuts out that image. I didn't quite get it perfect. It is slightly squiffy, but I'm not really worried about it. And now I'm deciding what I'm going to do with it. So I decided, you saw me actually articulate that with my hand there. I decided it was going to be a panel going down, and that was what's going to work. I went and chose some dark green cardstock. Again, I am using quite cheap cardstock here. This is just stuff I bought off Amazon. It's fine. It does for a card. It's not the best quality, but it'll do. What I tend to do when things are not great quality is I layer up cardstock. So I decided on a second panel, and so I have to fiddle a bit again with my my position there, and then I ended up, this panel will work with a lovely frame around it there, but I do feel like I need something else. So I went and had a little hunt in my die stash and found these old Spellbinders sort of scallop circle. I do think an oval would have been nice, but I didn't have an oval in this. I just fancied the scallop. I just thought it added something a bit different, and that just gives enough separation between the background and the foreground, and that's great. Now, sentiment. I decided to stamp and emboss the sentiment here that was from the set. Again, use that gold embossing powder. You'll know if you've been following me for a while, I love a sentiment that has a coordinating die. These don't, so I do have to do a bit of fussy cutting. Not my preferred way of cutting out a sentiment. I always think a die cut one looks much better, but it's, you know, needs must. And what I didn't want to do was cover up too much of the image with the sentiment by adding it as a panel and having like a different colour, different kind of shape. So I decided it would do. Now, I took this scrap of the lilac cardstock, which is actually left over from the previous card. So little note here to say, please do go check out the series. I have a whole playlist on using up this magazine kit. And so yeah, I used a scrap and I just folded it over a couple of times, and that just gives the dimension between the layers. I did, you'll see, use the distressing tool on the edge as well, just again to give a bit of texture to it. Now at this point I wanted a bit more gold, and at first I was being kind of like, I'm going to be quite precise in my position of these dots of the gold, so I use the end of the paintbrush, not the actual brush part of the paintbrush. And then I went nah, and then used my fan brush and just did liberal splatter. Funny, it was just easier to do that in the first place. Why I didn't do that. I did exactly the same with the sentiment, in terms of I just took little scraps of the cardstock, put it underneath, and that again just gives that little bit of dimension when I'm adding my sentiment, so there's a bit of separation between the image and the sentiment on the top. Now I decided to strengthen, even though it was a thick cardstock, I decided to strengthen that die cut floral element by just die cutting another layer and gluing them together. You'll see I've used lots of different adhesives in this particular card. In terms of, I've used the little Kingston tape runner, I've probably used my ATG, and I've used my wet glue. So it was a full-on adhesive day this day. I used a bit of everything. I did put a little bit of weight, so using that stamp acrylic block onto the image just to hold it in place whilst it dried. And then I used a little scrap of the cards of the paper onto this white panel that I'm just going to add as the insert. At this point I'm umming and ahhing about whether I add embellishments, and I decided, right, I'm going to add these gold flat sequins I've got in my stash. I can't even remember where I've got them from, but yeah, I'm going to add those with a little bit of glue. I don't do a brilliant job of this, so I end up with fingerprints all over them and all the rest of it, which you'll see on the photos in a minute. So yeah, I make a bit of a mess with the glue. It's fine, it'll all dry clear in the end, but yeah, that's what happens when you're doing these things. So there you go, I ummed and ahed, decided it was a done deal. I'm happy with it, and it's nice to have done a dark green cardstock. I think quite a lot of the other ones have been quite bright so far, so this was quite nice to have done something a bit dark and a bit moody, and it was lovely to do that floral image. So I hope you're enjoying this series. If you have seen them before, please do comment below. Are you enjoying it? And please do like, subscribe if you're not already. I'd love to see you again. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.